Jabil, joining us from Penang, Malaysia. So Sujay has around 10 plus years of experience in IT field, where he made that transition from managing a large data center from physical server to working in the cloud. And today he is here sharing with us his expertise on implementing a landing zone in Azure using Docker containers. So let me add you. Okay, over to you, Sujay.
Yeah. Can you confirm? Do you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
It's on full screen mode, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sujay Pillai. I'm based out of Penang, a small state in Malaysia, and I work as a cloud engineer for a company called Jabil over here. And I'm also a Docker captain and a Docker community leader, where I run the Docker Penang meetup group, also the Kubernetes Penang meetup group. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Bangalore Meetup, Collab community, and the JFrog to support these kind of events and having me on the list as a speaker. So the topic what we are going to listen for the next half an hour is called Rover. Basically, I'm going to introduce you to a tool which is currently being in development. It's very new, which helps you to get started with your cloud journey, especially in Azure. So we're going to cover most of the topics around it and how we can leverage that in a Docker container. So basically, the agenda for the session would be like talk about basic things about Azure Cloud Adoption Framework, understanding what is a landing zone, and the tool which I just spoke about, like the Rover, what it is, and how it can help us to build our landing zones, especially in Azure, which you can then go and adapt to your cloud provider also if needed. And we will go through a small demo around it. So let's get started. And before we start having into the topic, let's have a basic understanding about what is the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, especially for Azure. So let's say if you are new to cloud and starting your cloud journey, you would have to think of many things like defining your roadmap and then articulate your visions to the business and get approval from them. Uh, there are many other things to consider about, like your existing infrastructure, the governance piece, how the security model would be when you move to the cloud, what should be your operating model, what kind of workloads you need to migrate to the cloud. And also there is a piece of cost associated with it. So you need to do all this analysis before you start the journey. So Microsoft has been working with many of their customers, and they found few certain challenges these customers encounter while they are adopting the cloud in their organization. And some of these challenges, main three challenges are, the first is the justifying the business use case. So how would you justify the business and make sure that they are ready to your plans to move some of the workloads to the cloud and start your cloud journey? So that's one of the things. And then the second thing is technical depth, which if I have to explain, like we may have some legacy applications which are running in our infrastructure. These are not updated to the latest and the greatest technologies. So moving these to the cloud may be a daunting task. Or maybe the developers or the person who used to work on this application have already left the organization. So you are very scared touching these kind of applications moving to the cloud. So that's kind of a technical depth area. And the most important thing is the skills, adapting to all these new technologies as they come up, especially in the clouds. Your people have to be trained very well, getting understanding how a particular piece of technology gets adopted into the cloud. So these are kind of basic challenges. So Microsoft what has done is that they went down, and after working with most of their customers, they put down a nice set of documentation around the best practices, what technical guidance should be there for the people, and the tools that should be used to move such kind of workloads into the cloud. So that's basically the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure is. So in a simple terms, it's just the best practices, what they have learned from their customers, and they have well-defined documentation around it. So if you look on the screen, your cloud journey when you start with cloud may look like from left to right. So basically you start with defining a strategy where you document all your motivations and use cases, and after your business justification, kind of try to plan to move to the cloud. And the first phase is like, so basically plan, ready, and adopt are the miniature 3 phases when you start to move to the cloud. And in the plan phase, that's where you kind of align your actionable cloud adoption plan, understand what needs to be migrated, what kind of application needs to be taken into the cloud. And this is where you analyze your technical depth and everything. And after analyzing that, you kind of prepare your people to adapt to this kind of technologies, give kind of some trainings, and then kind of define a process and environment which would help you to get started with cloud. And once you are have this plan, second phase is ready, where you deploy your get ready with your Azure subscriptions and everything, setting up the environment, the best practices for the validations, and set up a kind of a blueprint or the first landing zone, which basically helps you to start your journey. And then you slowly migrate your workloads into this environment. And basically, all these pieces, what you see, also have a set of governance and manage thing associated with it. So where in the governance piece, you define who should act, what kind of access should be given, what security baselines should be set for this cloud environment, what you have set up. And then that's how you basically get started with your journey into the cloud. And if I have to speak specifically about landing zone, so a landing zone hence can be defined. So if you switch back, we will be just concentrating on this part, how to define your landing zone, which would help you to get started with. So basically, if you have to define landing zone, it would be kind of a set of rules and configurations which helps you to bootstrap your first cloud environment. And basically, it's kind of setting up the identity and access management, the auditing and logging piece, what is associated with it, various compliance regulations, the security and the monitoring piece, and then the networking and baseline infrastructure, what you need to lay down to start your cloud journey. So in short, if I had to explain you in simple terms, it would be like setting up all the infrastructure components that that's needed to deploy your application into the cloud. So that's basically called a landing zone. And we all know that we can leverage infrastructure as a code, because doing all these activities, what I just said, manually is very daunting task, and there is like chances of error doing this on a repeatable fashion. So that's where we can leverage the infrastructure as a code methodology, where which would help us to set up environments in the fastest mean possible ways, and thus removing the human element part in that. And thus, this would also help to set up more environment visibility and improve the developer efficiency. So by adapting to the infrastructure as a code piece, you can store your infrastructure definition alongside with your application code also. And one such tool, what we already know, is Terraform. So that's where Microsoft went ahead and adopted Terraform in the cloud adoption framework. So there is a set of tools which is provided by Microsoft for deploying your landing zones, and that basically at the back end uses Terraforms. So if you go into the Microsoft website, what I've linked over here, you can see that the landing zone on Terraform is basically composed of 4 different pieces together. The first piece is set of Terraform landing zone, which is basically they have pre-built a set of Terraform files, which helps you to deploy your infrastructure. And these are combined into as a module. So they develop their own Terraform modules, and they also have pushed those modules onto the Terraform registry, where you can pull it down as needed. And specifically, we will be talking mostly on this last piece, which is called Rover, which is basically a Docker container provided by Microsoft to do all this deployment. So the Rover is basically a Docker container, which is basically a wrapper on Terraform, and you can kind of make use of Rover to deploy the landing zones in your infrastructure. So basically the advantage is that when it is a Docker container, maybe if you are working on a Windows machine or a Mac or Linux, you just have to have Docker installation and you run the tool. It's going to work the same way across all different platforms. And the second advantage is that it has basic integration with Visual Studio Code and GitHub code spaces. So that's where I'm going to show you how it is integrated with Visual Studio Code. And if you go to the Docker Hub, you can see there are 2 different images available for this. One is a standalone Rover binary itself, which is basically the piece of software which helps you to deploy the landing zone in your Azure infrastructure. And then if you have to adopt this into your DevOps pipeline, there is also a Rover agent which you can integrate and basically call into your Azure DevOps pipeline or maybe other CI/CD tools like Jenkins, etc. So that's basically about Rover. So let's jump into a demo over here. So what I will do is I will switch to my terminal. Let me get out of this. I hope the fonts are clear to everyone for the demo. And if you have to visit the GitHub page for this, this is the website where you can find all these pieces. So, and this is where I talked about the 4 different modules. So basically the repository is divided into these projects, and we are specifically concentrating on Rover over here. So what I did is that I went ahead and cloned this starter kit project, which is basically bootstrapping, kind of an example for you to bootstrap something into Azure. And so I have already cloned that into my machine. And if you do Docker ps command, you would see that there is no Docker container running right now in my machine. So what I'm going to do is that just open up this code base into Visual Studio Code. And as soon as I do that, you'll see my Visual Studio Code popping up. And if you see on the left-hand side of the navigation, you see a dev container folder. So basically, this is where the Visual Studio Code knows that if the project has to run in a Docker container, I can leverage this dev .dev container folder, and with help of this Docker Compose file, uh, what it does is that at the back end spins up a container for me. It's basically right now at the back end activating the container for me, and you see there is a pop-up folder contains a dev container configuration file. Do you want to reopen this to develop in a container? So when I click on this one, reopen in a container, and you would quickly see that my machine would spin up a Docker container for me soon.